The courtroom had never seen anything quite like this moment. Karen Lawrence stood trembling with righteous indignation, her perfectly manicured finger pointing directly at Sarah Chen like a weapon, and the words that came out of her mouth would trigger the most explosive confrontation in Judge Judy's entire television career. Your husband was a drug dealer, and everyone in this courtroom needs to know the truth about the kind of person you really are. The silence that followed was suffocating. Sarah's face went white as shock rippled through her body. The audience erupted in gasps and murmurs of disbelief. Even the bailiff shifted uncomfortably, recognizing that something unprecedented was unfolding. But the most dramatic transformation happened in Judge Judy herself. Her eyes, which had been carefully observing the proceedings with professional detachment, suddenly blazed with an intensity that made the entire courtroom feel like the temperature had dropped 20 degrees. What Karen didn't know was that she had just made the worst mistake of her life. What she couldn't possibly understand was that Judge Judy had been waiting for this exact moment, had been setting a trap from the very first question, and had evidence in that manila folder on her desk that would not only destroy Karen's case but obliterate her entire existence. Before we show you the exact moment when Judge Judy delivered the reply that left Karen speechless for 38 seconds and shocked the entire nation, you need to understand how we got here. This wasn't just another petty dispute over property or money. This was about a woman who thought she could weaponize the legal system to destroy a grieving widow and her children. This was about greed so profound that it turned a neighbor into a predator who would slander a dead man to steal his family's home. And this was about justice delivered with such precision and fury that it would become the most viral courtroom moment in internet history, shared over 150 million times across every social media platform imaginable. If you believe that people who falsely accuse others deserve real consequences, smash that like button right now. Hit subscribe because what happens in the next several minutes will restore your faith that sometimes, just sometimes, the system works exactly as it should to protect the innocent and punish those who abuse it. Sarah Chen had never imagined she would end up in a courtroom fighting for her dignity and her children's future. 6 months ago, her world had been completely normal. She worked as a pediatric nurse at Children's Hospital, pulling double shifts to help families through their worst moments. Her husband Michael had been a pharmaceutical sales representative for a Fortune 500 company, traveling the region to help doctors understand new medications that could save lives. They had 2 beautiful children, Emma who was 8 and Jason who was 6. They owned a modest but comfortable condo in a middle-class complex, nothing fancy but enough space for their family to build memories together. Then Michael died suddenly from a massive heart attack at age 36, collapsing in a hotel room during a business trip, leaving Sarah to navigate grief while trying to hold her shattered family together. The medical bills from Michael's final hospitalization, combined with funeral costs and the reality of losing half their household income, had created financial pressure that Sarah never anticipated. After 3 months of trying to manage mortgage payments on her nurse's salary alone, she made the difficult decision to sell their condo and move closer to her parents who could help with childcare while she rebuilt their lives. She listed the property for $425,000, which was fair market value according to 3 different real estate appraisals. The condo was well maintained in a good school district, and should have sold within a reasonable time frame. That's when Karen Lawrence entered her life like a hurricane of calculated cruelty. Karen lived 3 units down from Sarah and had been the self-appointed guardian of property values and neighborhood standards for the past 5 years. She served on the HOA board, ran the Neighborhood Watch program, and had a reputation for making life miserable for anyone who violated her personal code of conduct. When Sarah's condo went on the market, Karen saw an opportunity. She approached Sarah with an offer of $280,000, nearly $150,000 below asking price. When Sarah politely declined, explaining that she needed to get fair value to secure her children's future, Karen's friendly facade disappeared completely. What followed was a systematic campaign of destruction designed to crater the property value and force Sarah into a desperate sale. Karen began spreading rumors throughout the complex and posting on neighborhood social media groups. She told potential buyers that the condo had structural problems, that the previous owner had been involved in suspicious activities, that there were noise complaints and pest infestations. None of it was true, but the whispers were enough to scare away 3 solid offers over the next 6 months. The rumors started small but grew more vicious with each passing week. Karen would conveniently be in the parking lot whenever potential buyers arrived for showings, striking up seemingly casual conversations that always ended with carefully planted seeds of doubt. She would mention how the previous owner kept odd hours and had a lot of visitors at strange times. She would talk about how pharmaceutical sales representatives sometimes had access to controlled substances and how you never really knew what people were doing behind closed doors. The implications were clear even if she never said anything directly actionable. She was painting Michael Chen as someone involved in illegal activities, and she was doing it with just enough plausible deniability that Sarah couldn't prove defamation in any conversation. But Karen's campaign went far beyond casual conversations in parking lots. She created posts in the neighborhood Facebook group asking if anyone else had noticed suspicious activity at Sarah's address. She filed noise complaints with the HO, even though Sarah's children were quiet and well-behaved. She reported code violations that didn't exist, forcing Sarah to pay for inspections that found nothing wrong. Every tactic was designed to create a paper trail that would make the property appear problematic to anyone doing due diligence. 3 different buyers put in strong offers only to withdraw after doing neighborhood research and finding Karen's carefully constructed web of innuendo and false reports. Each failed sale pushed Sarah closer to financial catastrophe as mortgage payments continued to drain her savings and foreclosure became an increasingly real threat. The breaking point came when Sarah received her 4th solid offer, this time from a young family who seemed perfect for the condo. They loved the space, appreciated the school district, and were pre-approved for financing at the asking price. Sarah allowed herself to hope that maybe, finally, she could move forward with her life and give her children the stability they desperately needed after losing their father. Then Karen struck with her most devastating blow yet. She approached the potential buyers directly in the parking lot and told them that Michael Chen had been under investigation for drug trafficking before his death, that the property might be subject to asset forfeiture, and that they should run away from this deal as fast as possible. The buyers, terrified by the prospect of legal complications, withdrew their offer that same evening. Sarah received the cancellation email while helping Emma with homework and broke down sobbing at the kitchen table while her children watched helplessly. That night, Sarah made the decision that would eventually lead her to Judge Judy's courtroom. She contacted a lawyer who specialized in defamation and explained everything that had happened over the past 8 months. The attorney investigated Karen's claims and found absolutely no evidence that Michael had ever been involved in anything illegal. His employment records were pristine, his tax returns showed legitimate income matching his salary, and law enforcement confirmed he had never been investigated for anything more serious than a speeding ticket from 2012. Armed with this documentation, Sarah filed a lawsuit against Karen Lawrence for defamation, intentional interference with a property sale, and infliction of emotional distress. She was asking for $100,000 in damages to cover the financial losses from the delayed sale, the emotional trauma inflicted on her family, and punitive damages to send a message that you cannot destroy someone's reputation with lies for personal gain. When Karen received the lawsuit, her response was not remorse or concern but outrage that this grieving widow had the audacity to challenge her. She hired an attorney and prepared a defense strategy that would paint Sarah as someone trying to hide her husband's criminal activities behind widow's tears and manufactured sympathy. Karen spent 3 weeks preparing for what she believed would be her moment of vindication. She compiled a binder full of neighborhood gossip, social media screenshots, and her own detailed notes about what she considered suspicious behavior. She practiced her testimony in front of her bathroom mirror, perfecting the concerned citizen routine she planned to perform. She selected a designer outfit that would project authority and respectability. She told her friends and neighbors that she was going to expose the truth about the Chen family on national television and finally prove that her concerns had been legitimate all along. What Karen didn't know was that Judge Judy's research team had been conducting their own investigation into both parties from the moment the case was assigned. They had pulled Michael Chen's complete background, including employment records, financial statements, criminal history checks, and interviews with former colleagues who described him as honest, hardworking, and completely above board in all his professional dealings. But more importantly, they had also pulled Karen Lawrence's background, and what they found was explosive. Judge Judy had reviewed all of this information personally the night before the courtroom taping, and she had made a decision. This case was going to be more than just a ruling on defamation. This was going to be a lesson about what happens when someone weaponizes false accusations to prey on the vulnerable. The trap was set, and Karen Lawrence was about to walk directly into it. The Judge Judy courtroom buzzed with its usual energy as cameras rolled and the audience settled into their seats for what the production schedule listed as a straightforward defamation case. Nobody in that room, except perhaps Judge Judy herself, had any idea they were about to witness television history. Sarah Chen entered first, wearing a simple navy blue dress that her sister had helped her pick out, clutching a folder of documents against her chest like a shield. Her hands trembled slightly as she took her position at the plaintiff's table, and even from a distance you could see the exhaustion in her eyes. This was a woman who had been ground down by months of harassment, who had cried herself to sleep worrying about her children's future, who was making one last desperate attempt to fight back against someone who had systematically destroyed her life. Karen Lawrence entered moments later with the confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences for her behavior. Her designer suit was perfectly tailored, her jewelry tastefully expensive, and her leather portfolio swung from her hand like a weapon she couldn't wait to deploy. She didn't even glance at Sarah as she passed, treating the grieving widow with the same dismissive indifference she had shown throughout their entire nightmare relationship. Judge Judy opened the proceedings with her signature no-nonsense approach, her voice cutting through the courtroom with authority that made everyone sit a little straighter. "Mrs. Chin, you're suing Mrs. Lawrence for defamation and interference with your property sale. Tell me what happened." Sarah's opening testimony was quiet but steady as she explained the timeline of events. She described her husband's sudden death, the financial pressure that forced her to sell their home, and the initial listing of the property. Her voice cracked slightly when she explained how Karen had approached with a lowball offer and how everything changed after she declined. She presented evidence of the 3 failed sales, showing the timeline of when each buyer withdrew and what reasons they gave. She described the social media posts, the false HOA complaints, and the systematic campaign of rumors that had poisoned every potential sale. When she talked about her children asking why people said bad things about their daddy, several audience members wiped tears from their eyes. Judge Judy listened carefully, taking notes and occasionally asking pointed questions that showed she had already done extensive research on the case. Then she turned her attention to Karen, and the temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop several degrees. "Mrs. Lawrence, Mrs. Chin claims you deliberately spread false information about her late husband to damage her property sale. What do you have to say about these accusations?" Karen's response was delivered with the practiced confidence of someone who had been rehearsing this moment for weeks. "Your Honor, I am simply a concerned neighbor who takes the safety and property values of our community seriously. When I noticed certain activities that seemed suspicious, I felt it was my duty to make sure potential buyers had all the information they needed to make informed decisions. This is about transparency and community standards, not about any personal vendetta." Judge Judy's eyes narrowed slightly, and experienced viewers recognized this as the first warning sign that Karen was walking into dangerous territory. "What specific activities did you find suspicious, Mrs. Lawrence?" Karen launched into her prepared speech about odd hours, frequent visitors, and the general sense that something wasn't quite right about Michael Chen's work in pharmaceuticals. She talked about her responsibility as an HOA board member and neighborhood watch captain to investigate potential problems before they became crises. She spoke with such conviction that someone who didn't know better might actually believe she had legitimate concerns rather than manufactured excuses to manipulate a property sale. Judge Judy let her talk, occasionally nodding, asking follow-up questions that seemed sympathetic to Karen's position. Karen grew more confident with each answer, clearly believing she was winning over the judge with her concerned citizen routine. Then Judge Judy asked the question that began Karen's unraveling. "Mrs. Lawrence, did you make an offer to purchase Mrs. Chen's property yourself?" Karen hesitated for just a moment before admitting that yes, she had made an offer, but it was a fair market offer based on her assessment of the property's true value. Judge Judy pressed further. "And what was that offer?" $280,000, Karen replied, her voice still confident. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair with that slight smile that regular viewers knew meant something devastating was coming. "So you offered $145,000 below asking price, and when Mrs. Chin declined your offer, you began telling people her husband was involved in suspicious activities. Do you see how someone might think those two events were connected?" Karen's face flushed red as she realized the trap closing around her, but her arrogance wouldn't let her back down. "Your Honor, I resent the implication that my legitimate concerns about community safety had anything to do with a business transaction. Some of us actually care about more than just money." The condescension in Karen's voice was palpable, and it was about to trigger an explosion that would define the rest of her life. Judge Judy's expression hardened into something that made even the bailiff take notice. "Mrs. Lawrence, you mentioned that pharmaceutical sales representatives sometimes have access to controlled substances. Can you elaborate on why you found that relevant to your concerns about Mr. Chin?" Karen seized what she thought was an opportunity to justify her actions, launching into an explanation about how people in certain professions have opportunities for illegal activities and how the community deserved to know about potential risks. Her voice grew louder and more confident as she warmed to her theme, clearly believing she was making a compelling case. Judge Judy listened without interrupting, her fingers steepled in front of her face, and anyone who knew her recognized this posture as the calm before an absolute storm. When Karen finally finished her monologue, Judge Judy leaned forward with laser focus. "So you're saying that because of Mr. Chen's profession, you had reasonable suspicion he might be involved in drug dealing?" Karen nodded vigorously, missing the trap entirely. "Exactly, Your Honor. Someone needed to ask the hard questions and do the difficult work of protecting our community." That's when Karen made the fatal mistake that would destroy everything. She turned slightly toward Sarah, her face twisted with self-righteous anger, and said the words that would echo across America. "Your Honor, the man was clearly a drug dealer." She pointed directly at Sarah with accusatory fury. "She knows it. Everyone knows it. Why else would a pharmaceutical rep have so much money and keep such odd hours? Someone needed to tell the truth about what was really going on in that condo." The courtroom exploded with gasps and shocked exclamations. Sarah covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Several audience members called out in protest before the bailiff gestured for silence. But the most dramatic reaction came from Judge Judy herself. Her face transformed from controlled professionalism into barely restrained fury, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of absolute authority mixed with righteous anger that made the walls seem to vibrate. "Mrs. Lawrence, you just made a very serious accusation on national television. Drug dealing is a federal felony. Do you understand the gravity of what you just said?" Karen's confidence faltered slightly, but her arrogance pushed her forward. "Yes, Your Honor, and I stand by it. Someone needed to tell the truth, and apparently I'm the only one with the courage to do it." The silence that followed was suffocating. Judge Judy sat back in her chair and opened the thick manila folder that had been sitting on her desk throughout the entire proceeding. She pulled out several documents and began reviewing them with deliberate slowness, letting the tension build to an almost unbearable level. Karen shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her earlier confidence beginning to crack around the edges as she realized something had fundamentally changed in the courtroom atmosphere. Judge Judy finally looked up from the documents, and her eyes locked onto Karen with the intensity of a predator who had been patiently waiting for exactly the right moment to strike. "Mrs. Lawrence, since you're so concerned about drug dealers and criminal activity, let's talk about truth. Let's talk about evidence. Let's talk about what real investigation reveals versus what malicious gossip creates." Judge Judy held up the first document. "This is Michael Chen's complete employment history with Merck Pharmaceuticals. 12 years of exemplary service, multiple performance awards, and a spotless professional record. This is his criminal background check. Not a single arrest, not even a parking ticket beyond one speeding violation from 2012. These are his tax returns for the past 10 years, all showing legitimate income that matches exactly what a pharmaceutical sales representative at his level would earn. These are statements from his employer confirming that he was never under investigation, never suspected of any wrongdoing, and that all company medications were accounted for with zero discrepancies." Judge Judy's voice grew stronger with each piece of evidence, building toward something that everyone in the courtroom could feel coming. "So Mrs. Lawrence, based on what possible evidence did you conclude that Michael Chen was a drug dealer?" Karen's face had gone pale, but she tried desperately to maintain her composure. "Your Honor, I had concerns based on what I observed and what seemed suspicious to me as someone who knows this community." Judge Judy's response was swift and brutal. "What you observed? You observed a man going to work and coming home. You observed a family living their lives. You observed nothing that would give any reasonable person cause for concern, and yet you felt entitled to destroy this widow's life with baseless accusations designed to manipulate her into selling her home to you at a fraction of its value. But here's what makes your behavior truly despicable, Mrs. Lawrence." Judge Judy pulled out another document from her folder, and Karen's eyes went wide with sudden recognition and fear. "Since you're so concerned about people who illegally possess controlled substances, let me ask you about your own background." Karen's mouth opened but no sound came out as Judge Judy continued her methodical destruction. "You have 2 DUI arrests on your record, one from 2016 and one from 2019. Both arrests involved prescription medications that you were not legally authorized to possess. The first arrest included charges for illegal possession of Xanax without a prescription. The second arrest included charges for illegal possession of Vicodin that you had obtained through fraudulent means from multiple doctors. You plea bargained both cases down to reduced charges, paid fines, and completed court-ordered substance abuse counseling." The courtroom erupted in shocked exclamations as Karen's carefully constructed facade shattered completely. Her face cycled through expressions of shock, horror, and desperate panic as she realized that everything she had tried to hide was being exposed on national television in front of millions of viewers. Judge Judy was not finished with her systematic destruction of Karen's credibility and character. "So let me understand this correctly, Mrs. Lawrence. You illegally possessed controlled substances on multiple occasions. You were arrested twice for driving under the influence of those illegally obtained medications. You manipulated the medical system to get prescription drugs you had no legitimate need for. And yet you felt qualified to stand in my courtroom and accuse a dead man who never broke a single law of being a drug dealer. The hypocrisy is so staggering that I'm almost impressed by your audacity." Karen tried desperately to speak, her voice coming out as a strangled whisper. "Your Honor, that was in the past. I made mistakes and I paid for them. Those situations have nothing to do with my legitimate concerns about community safety." Judge Judy leaned forward with an expression of such withering contempt that Karen physically recoiled in her chair. "Nothing to do with it? Everything about this case is connected to your character, your credibility, and your motivation. You saw a vulnerable widow trying to sell her home. You saw an opportunity to exploit her grief and financial desperation. When she refused your insulting lowball offer, you launched a calculated campaign to destroy her property value by slandering her dead husband with the very crimes you yourself have actually committed. That's not community concern, Mrs. Lawrence. That's predatory behavior wrapped in a thin veneer of civic responsibility." Judge Judy then asked the question that would break Karen completely and create the moment that would be replayed millions of times across every social media platform. "Mrs. Lawrence, did you make these accusations because you wanted to buy Mrs. Chen's property at a fraction of its value?" The silence that followed was absolute. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. 5 seconds passed. Then 10. Her hands began to tremble visibly as sweat formed on her forehead despite the air-conditioned courtroom. 15 seconds. 20 seconds. The cameras captured every moment of her mental collapse as she struggled to formulate any response that wouldn't be a complete admission of guilt. 25 seconds. 30 seconds. The audience sat frozen, barely breathing, watching this woman's entire life unravel in real time. 35 seconds. Finally, after 38 excruciating seconds that felt like an eternity, Karen whispered in a voice barely audible through her microphone. "I thought if people knew about the concerns, the price would drop and I could help the community by buying it at a more reasonable price." The admission hung in the air like a confession at a murder trial. Judge Judy's response was immediate and devastating. "So you just confessed on national television that you slandered a dead man to manipulate a widow into selling her home cheaply. You destroyed this woman's reputation, her children's sense of security, and their memory of their father for personal financial gain. Mrs. Lawrence, I have presided over thousands of cases in my career, and I can honestly say that you are one of the most manipulative, callous, and morally bankrupt individuals I have ever encountered in my courtroom." Judge Judy's verdict was swift and merciless. "I am awarding Mrs. Chen $50,000 for defamation of her late husband's character. I am awarding her $30,000 for intentional interference with her property sale. I am awarding her $15,000 for emotional distress inflicted on her and her children. That is a total of $95,000 that you will pay immediately. Furthermore, I am recommending this case to the local prosecutor's office for potential criminal charges including defamation per se, conspiracy to commit fraud, and attempted extortion." The gavel came down with the finality of a guillotine blade, and Judge Judy delivered her final words with ice-cold fury. "Get out of my courtroom, Mrs. Lawrence. And let this be a lesson to anyone who thinks they can destroy innocent people with lies for personal profit." Karen stumbled from her chair, tears streaming down her face, her expensive portfolio falling to the floor and scattering papers everywhere. She tried to speak, to protest,